The very first edition of Blue Peter was broadcast on Thursday, the 16th of October, 1958, from the BBC's Lime Grove studios.
Hello.
Hello.
It was aimed at 5 to 8-year-olds and was the brainchild of producer John Hunter Blair and secretary Gilly Riley. To present it, they chose actor Christopher Trace.
My father told me that at the audition with John Hunter Blair, he was fully prepared to go and talk about, you know, television and what children wanted, but there in the office was a train set, and both of them were model train enthusiasts, and they got on famously. And I think it was, you know, a foregone conclusion from there on that he would have the job.
On to the water, and start up.
The programme was named after the flag that's raised as a ship is about to set sail.
All the works are inside, but I'll tell you more about those in a moment. There, what about that? That's pretty good, isn't it?
And now it's time for 6-5's own popular discoveries, the Mudlarks. And they've got precisely 2 minutes for my grandfather's clock.
Chosen to join Chris was Leela Williams, already a television presenter, but perhaps most famous for being Miss Great Britain 1957.
I was told that I was booked for a week, definitely, possibly 2 weeks, and I was to act as an assistant to Christopher Trace. It was more than we dared hope that it would be there for, say, 6 months. So I expected to be told that I wasn't needed the following week, but I didn't hear anything. So I turned up to the next allotted rehearsal, and when I opened the door, Gilly and John both met me, and they said, "Leela, it's a success, we're on the air." And that was absolutely superb.
We want Muffin, Muffin the mule, dear old Muffin playing the fool.
In the 1950s, programmes such as Muffin the Mule and Andy Pandy were forming the staple diet of children's programming. John Hunter Blair wanted Blue Peter to be something completely different.
He wanted it to be like a magazine, where you turn the pages and there was something new, something different, something going on all the time. That was what he was aiming at.
Also recruited to the team in the early months was artist Tony Hart, whose cartoon strip Packy the Elephant was recreated on screen.
I wrote the story, I did the drawings, and then I had to narrate it, you see. And I remember so well in those old studios, black and white, of course, then, that I had a clock. And the clock was there to tell me exactly when I started and exactly when I had to come out, you see. And Chris, dear old Chris, he was very naughty, and towards the end, you know, he'd start doing things like this, which he wasn't supposed to do because I had my clock there. I could see it perfectly well. And he would try and make me laugh.
Chris and I sort of had a big brother-sister relationship. I think that was the best way to explain. That's how we came over, but that's how we were. We got on really well. And John gave me away at my wedding. It was just a little happy family.
Blue Peter was a family, and I was extremely pleased to be allowed to be a cousin.
2 years later, Blue Peter was thriving. But John Hunter Blair was forced to take sick leave. One of the producers who stood in for him was Clive Parkhurst. The Blue Peter family was about to break up.
We just were like two raw wires, I suppose, and we just exploded. My contract was on a monthly basis, so at the end of the month, that was it.
Now, what are you going to tell us about today?
Well, I've got a story.
Auditions were held to find Leela's replacement.
Hello, Caroline.
Hello, everyone.
And I'd like you to meet Valerie Singleton.
Hello, Chris.
I was interviewed by Christopher Trace. Christopher asked me if I'd come very far, and I said in a very high-pitched voice, "No, not very far, only from Earl's Court."
No, I haven't come very far. I've only come from Earl's Court, about 10 minutes
Oh,
away.
not as far as Australia.
Didn't get it, funnily enough, the first time. somebody else got it.
I believe you started back in Hollywood somewhere. Well,
It was a most beautiful lady, and her name was Anita West. She was brought into the studio by the producer one day. And I remember all the men, you know, there was a sort of little move to get closer. You know. She really was a dish.
If you but knew.
I was a Blue Peter presenter between Leela and Val Singleton. But not a lot of people remember me, I don't think.
Anita West has never been publicly acknowledged as a Blue Peter presenter until now.
I was in it for about six and a half months.
I'd like to show them. This is, I want to do with Easter again.
You made your things, you told a story, you introduced somebody. I had one or two wonderful interviews. One was the guy from Walt Disney who did the artwork on The Sword and the Stone, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
But her marriage to jazz musician Ray Ellington wasn't going as smoothly. Divorce proceedings began, and Anita felt forced to resign.
I was really upset, and I know they were with me. And probably because they didn't know the background of why I was leaving. I didn't know how the divorce was going to go. If it could have been a messy one, then it would have been embarrassing for the children's program, which is what I thought. And I wanted the children around, and I wanted to be there for them. I don't have any regrets in retrospect, although professionally, obviously, I do, if I'm honest with myself, but from a private point of view, I don't. Two children are wonderful. Best thing I ever did in my life.
Now let's join Christopher Trace and Valerie Singleton for Blue Peter.
Second choice Valerie Singleton was asked back and stayed for 10 years, becoming the programme's longest-serving female presenter.
Hello. Well, if you think that icing or decorating a cake is just a job for girls, then you're wrong, because last week I went to the most mouth-watering exhibition. Although some of them, in fact, don't look like cakes, believe me, it is all cake.
Another significant appointment in 1962 was Biddy Baxter. This young radio studio manager with little television experience was offered the job of editor over other staff in the children's department.
I remember going home and having a completely sleepless night, thinking, I can't, I'm going to be rumbled. I know nothing, I'm not capable of doing it. I shall have to phone up tomorrow and say, I'm sorry, I can't take the job. And then in the morning I thought, well, if I do that, bang goes the whole of my career with the BBC. I better plunge in.
We all had a terrible feeling that Biddy was going to get it. And we weren't best pleased about it, I don't think, really. But she came with an idea of knowing what children wanted before she was able to actually translate it into television terms.
Well, at last the weather has proved to be kind enough to us to come down to Chessington Zoo and put the finishing touches on our Blue Peter seal competition. And right now we're waiting for the prize winner, and I can see the Blue Peter car coming now.
Edward and I very much wanted the programme to have a distinct identity, and he came up with the idea of a logo. Of course, now it's called branding.
I thought that perhaps a galleon shape, a simplified form. There we are. And now, in true Blue Peter style, let me show you one that I did earlier. That is the original Blue Peter ship, which I drew in 1963. I put it to Biddy and said, could you see your way to letting me have a penny every time it's used?
I think we paid him £100. The poor chap, if only he'd been on a royalty, he would have been the first of the television millionaires.
The logo led on to the famous Blue Peter badge, launched with a massive nationwide balloon release.
The badge was certainly for programme material. That was what children would win for sending in good ideas for the programme. So it was a very good way of becoming interactive. And it was a reward for children who were helping us, so everybody was happy.
You were basically shot at dawn with a rusty bullet if you went out on location without a badge. I mean, it was a cardinal sin.
You had to wear it, and it was irritating. It annoyed us. Sometimes I think we should have had them kind of, you know, like this little Indian marks on our brows.
It's the trademark, and of course one should have regarded this as that. I used to find it a bit of an irritant, and I know Johnny did, I know Val did as well, but it was perfectly valid, and I mean, we were very stupid to be annoyed by it.
I never had any problem. I had badges sewn onto my swimming costumes and hard hats and everything else, because wherever you are, you obviously have to have your... I think I've even got a badge and a pair of pyjamas.
She was such a Pollyanna. Sorry, Anne. She was so good. And she would want to wear her badge, just like, you know, that good girl at school.
Putting it on today, I just think, hey, there you go, back with the badge on. It feels quite at home.
My father nicked a few boxes from the production office and kept them at home, which apparently he should never have done. And unknown to him, I nicked a few of the badges out of the box and sold them in the playground. It was the start of my entrepreneurial life.
In 1963, Biddy and her deputy Edward Barnes were joined by Rosemary Gill, forming one of the most influential teams in the history of children's television.
I think we all had something quite different to offer, and yet we worked as a team very well. Christopher Chase said it was like having a three-headed monster coming at him.
Commercial television is here.
By the early 60s, the arrival of ITV was having serious consequences for the BBC. Ratings had plummeted, and the BBC took drastic action. The children's department was savaged and left with little more than Watch with Mother and Blue Peter.
Those of us left in children's programmes were enormously angry because we believed in children's programmes. We believed there was a job to be done and that it needed people who with a specialisation to do it. And it obsessed us, you know.
I'm sitting on a bed in one of the children's wards at the Mayday Hospital in South London. It's visiting day today, and we thought it'd be rather fun if we came down, the Blue Peter cameras, and played some record requests for the children here in the hospital.
The team's obsession paid off. Blue Peter's audience grew, and it was rewarded with a twice-weekly slot.
Now for an important announcement about Blue Peter. You may have heard that from now on you won't have to wait a week for the next programme, because from now on Blue Peter will be on Thursdays as well as on Mondays.
It was absolutely crucifyingly hard work.
Could I have some extra strong mints, please, and some golden syrup? Val, here to stay. Nice long life. Oh. Goodness, it's hard work doing the shopping with the line. There you are. 5 shillings. Thank you.
Well, we got that out. And today, in Great Britain, we have some of the finest firefighting forces in the world.
It was proving too much just for 2 presenters. There was one moment that Dad told me about, which was on Camber Sands, I think. They were filming a report. It was cold, it was wet, it was horrid, and he'd been stuck in swimming trunks waist deep in water for most of the day and had just had enough. And I think he said to Biddy, look, this is too much just for 2 of us, so you've got to bring on a 3rd.
Well, this is Steve. Well, Stevie is a dray horse, and he works for a brewery. Round, boy, round. There we are. Whoop.
I wasn't all that keen on horses because I'd never had anything to do with them. And I thought, what happens if he starts to run? What do I do? And of course I'd drive in the middle of that, but I got my way out of it.
It was a complete disaster when he came. I mean, I've never known anybody dry so much on the air in my life as no kid in the beginning.
Well, here you are. You've got the complete kite all ready for flying. Right, so any second now...
I think John Noakes has to be the most charismatic presenter of all time. There's never been one like him before, and I don't think there's ever been one like him since.
Is up.
Suddenly I feel awfully alone up here.
If you're an actor, the hardest thing to do is to relax enough to be yourself and to not put on a show. Now, I mean, I don't think I'd be stepping on Johnny's toes if I said that he actually did continue to put on a show. He invented this character, John Noakes, who was not really like John Noakes.
Well, you might say this is a trunk call from Ceylon to England, and I hope I don't get cut off.
I was never frightened going on stage. I used to get excited. And I used to laugh at some of the poor folks who used to tremble in the wings on the first night. And I used to say, well, you're in the business for it. It's great. Let's go on. Be whatever you're going to be. But did I get my comeuppance? Because that thing there, that lens, that piece of glass, stripped me naked. Do you want a piece?
Steady.
Hang on. Have you got it?
Steady. You're cutting it on the cross, that's why.
Whatever you do, don't drop this on your foot. That's for you.
You don't do yourself justice, you know. It's actually very light.
Anybody got an electric saw?
Just take that, John,
I
because,
then invented this
ever,
idiot,
this is a neck hold.
who I call John Noakes, who is not really the real John Noakes. I'm really quite a quiet person.
That was going, did you?
It's got no cheese on it at all, has it?
Oh, nibble off the other end.
Sweetheart.
Having Action Man appear on the scene took away a bit of the glory from Dad, and there was a Blue Peter special assignment in Norway where my father had rather more than a special assignment, and this got picked up and everything like that, and I think not only did it sour the relationship with my mother, but it also didn't help his reputation within the BBC, and he felt it was time to move on.
I don't think we were desperately broken-hearted, because I think he knew he had enough, and we thought, yes, it was time he moved on. I think we made mistakes later on with keeping on people for too long.
Chris's replacement was actor Peter Purvis.
I saw it as a job which I would do for 6 months, and then I could go back to the serious business of acting. Ho-ho.
Oh, sorry about that. Right in your ear hole. And you went all round the head like this. Oh, he's not self-raising, Flower. Oh, there we are.
I'm a bit light-headed.
Oh, I was blue instead of suck there. Special graded grains for you, Pete. There we are. But of course, instead of the bellows, you could use something like this. Get a piece of tin with some holes in the top, flour inside, and just sprinkle that on. Oh, I think the holes are rather large, am I?
They are, aren't they?
Sorry about that. Oh, it's on your uniform. You're in trouble now.
We worked so well together, and then they stopped us. I think they thought we were getting a bit too powerful. We were like Laurel and Hardy.
Will you keep an eye on him, please, Peter? Yeah. Thank you very much. Over to your tables now and draw up your trays. And whatever you do, keep your bottles upmost. We go here to the woods.
He said keep it upmost.
Right, bunnies, come on, up we come. Are you ready? Where you go? Go, girls, go, go. Come on, come on, come on, faster, faster. Go, that's your... No, you don't. How dare you try it on me? Oh, wait, wait. Good, next up to the line. Well done. Keep going.
I thought it was funny. Johnny thought it was funny. I think we were probably terribly self-indulgent. But we did think it was funny, but that really was just about the point where they said, no, we're not going to make films like that anymore.
We're going to rename this locomotive the 532 Blue Peter.
The sad thing, I think, was that you very much worked for the Blue Peter production team rather than working with the Blue Peter production team. When I moved into grown-up telly, for want of a better word, you know, you could go in and talk to your editor like an adult about any problems you might have, or you could suggest ideas. It wasn't like that on Blue Peter. We were like school children, really.
I didn't go to the office that often. I tried to avoid it, to be quite honest. Biddy ruled the roost. There's no question about that.
She would resent Ruthless, but she was ruthless on behalf of the audience, and I think she would accept that. And she would die for the audience, really.
Biddy never took no for an answer. Denied money to launch the Blue Peter badge, she went to the top and confronted Assistant Controller Donald Baverstock.
Everybody was terrified of Baverstock. And Baverstock hit the roof, and she said, just a minute, I've got something you need to know. And she, at the end of the interview, he called in Joanna Spicer, who was the planning person, and said, Joanna, give her 500 quid for badges. And she said, you can't do that, Donald. He said, I've just done it. Donald liked that, you see. He liked somebody who would take him on.
Somebody said the other day, you know, were you frightened of Biddy? I think most of the BBC was, probably still is. Great respect for her, but she was very demanding.
And if people weren't living up to those standards and weren't giving of their absolute best, or were being at all cynical about them, God help them.
There's no need for him to have a monitor there because he's either looking at the birds or looking at Jemima.
I loved her. I loved her. I thought she was a one-off. I thought she was terribly astute. And I had a lovely kind of relationship with her, really.
If you'd been introduced to Biddy as an editor, you would absolutely assume that you must mean she's the editor of Vogue or Harper's, or even Cosmo, actually. Because that's what she looks like.
Because I'd grown up watching the programme, I always imagined Biddy Baxter to be this little cardiganed, grey-haired person, you know, rather sweet. Cardigan, not actually on, but just draped down to her shoulders, in fact.
She's very glamorous. She's had her hair done up and big earrings and sort of, you know, her wonderful dresses and shoulder pads.
Wearing black tights that you just knew weren't tights were stockings, who thought nothing of dipping forward and showing a little too much décolletage. Well, not too much as far as the Scoutmasters were concerned, because that's when she used it. You know, she could persuade any Scoutmaster with one dip to spend an extra hour in the garden with those Scouts, even if they were freezing to death, to get the right shot. I thought, yeah, I like this woman. She's going to be a challenge, but I'm going to really enjoy working with her. And my God, she taught me so much.
Can you read the script?
The thing that everyone will remember about Biddy, no question about it, is the sound of her. And it was the sound of her approaching for either notes or to bollock somebody or whatever it was.
The sound of Biddy is stilettos down the steps from the gallery. Click, 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 click.
Click, click, clicking down the metal steps.
You know, by the pace of the heels, you know how bad you'd been or what had gone wrong, you know.
We're cutting the Pompeii story, knocking it on to another programme.
It was really hard work because when we were there as well, there was no autocue, so you had to learn the whole script. At, you know, 10 to 5, Biddy would come clicking down the steps and change it all again anyway, so you'd just be going on air thinking, I've got no idea what I'm about to say.
This is wrong, that's wrong, I'm cutting this, I'm changing that. And it took me a couple of years to acquire a discipline to cope with those changes. Initially, I couldn't understand why there was this additional pressure.
Can we swap the order of handing out lava round? Because as Peter's got to move now, it's better if he's on the left. So hand out lava to Peter first.
It's a bit odd. Oh, but that's the funny, because the funny bit, he gives the big bit to Sarah and I get the little bit.
Doesn't matter. That's just apply your mind and stop panicking.
Because of the demands of the live show, of the programme, you would do all sorts of mischievous things.
If he'd done a real cracker of an innuendo, say, coming out of a film, then those heels would be there, but he would be out like a bat out of hell before she could catch him.
Hedges give the countryside its beautiful patchwork quilt look, and it's good to know there are plenty of people still around to look after them.
There's an awful lot more to that than meets the eye, isn't there?
Yes, there is. It's also, I think, a little bit the look of the draw. One of the competitors was saying to me early in the morning that as long as you have a decent length to start with, well, then you can manage a good lay.
Innuendo? What do you mean, matron?
We never, ever saw the programme as a whole until the dress rehearsal, the run-through. So you had this one time to put everything together, to see whether it gelled. Some items would come good, some wouldn't be as good as you thought. We would expand some, we'd cut others.
Cut that page, darling, and cut that paragraph, and so suddenly your whole brain had to be changed.
She was convinced that, because I used to backcomb my hair furiously all the time because it was quite long and to get it stay out, and then spray masses with spray on, and she was convinced that whenever she came to give notes in the dressing room before we did, in the makeup room before we did the show, that I was just spraying it to keep her away. So she wouldn't tell me too much. But I can't tell you whether that was true or not.
Honk that horn as soon as it's over. It was the only way to produce a programme that was really going to deliver to the audience. No, you get a cue to move, first of all.
No, we were getting two.
Yeah, it's occurred to me. It's occurred to me that as you can hear, you can perfectly capable of hearing when the drum roll's finished. You might just as well do it after that.
I think I'm very unusual in this. I quite like the last-minute changes. I quite like the sort of, you know, cut the last bit of that item or take 5 seconds out of this. I really got off on that.
Janet Ellis was absolutely fantastic. I remember she could learn the telephone directory.
Charlotte died on March the 31st, 1859, the last of the brilliant but tragic Bronte family who had come to that Haworth parsonage 35 years before. And until a few months ago, people only knew what she looked like from pictures like this. But in 1984, the National Portrait Gallery made a very exciting discovery. Sometimes, you know, if the programme had gone pretty well, you're just thinking, yeah, actually, yeah, life's totally great. And she'd come up to you and go, what happened? I said, what do you mean, what happened? You said 1847, darling, it was 1848. What happened? I just forgot. In the middle of it all, you know, I forgot.
Where am I? I'm talking... Sorry. I think if they're honest, all the presenters will admit that at one time or another we moaned about the fact that we didn't have auto cue. Absolutely, completely lost. Right, OK, let's start about dance again.
Most studio programmes were already using auto cue, but it wasn't until 1987 that Biddy allowed it, finally putting an end to the studio memory test.
Serious party.
For a programme like Blue Peter, there is just so much to learn. It's almost impossible not to have it, but it can really dampen spontaneity in the studio, and that's why I think you tended to see more of the presenter's personality on film.
Wow! Oh, that is amazing!
You forget the fear.
Yes.
Sometimes you think of the fear.
What, Turner?
You won't strangle me, will you?
I'd keep your mouth shut if I were you.
I think
The temperature was
Blue Peter began travelling the world in an age when Benidorm was considered a long-haul flight. The summer expedition became a regular fixture.
We didn't actually stop at the Raffles Hotel because we'd heard that in there, one glass of orange squash costs 3 and 6pence.
Showing them a new country, a new way of life, different people's cultures. And we were there and kind of partaking and meeting some of the people who lived there. I think most people enjoyed it.
I wonder if you can guess what this is. An old detergent bottle.
This one is quite cheap and easy to make, so if you'd like to have a go, I'll show you what to do.
Cut 2 inches off all the way round.
We need a base for our island.
The witch's hat is an ice cream cone covered with chocolate.
You need to cut out a base from some green card.
Then some glue, 2 circles of sticky back plastic stuck together.
Here's some that I froze earlier.
Now, this is the idea which Margaret Parnell has come up with for 1986.
Mother of 2 Margaret Parnell first wrote to the programme more than 30 years ago.
I had this idea for this doll's hat, and I thought I'll send it up to Valerie Singleton. It was made out of crepe paper. I got them together in all the stages, the bits, you know, the different bits. And she wrote back and said they liked it and they were going to use it, much to my surprise, and that started it. And had I got any more ideas?
She just became a fixture and was brilliant and enormously inventive.
Now, I certainly didn't have any formal art training because I left school when I was 14. And that was it. It was just I enjoyed making things. Terrible scissors. It takes me about a week to work it out and try all the different ways of doing it, and then maybe a week to actually do the different stages and get it ready to go. So about a fortnight's about an average.
And at this point, if you just try it against your face, like so...
I still find that if I go to the shops and see the new containers or anything, I sometimes, you know, I get ideas like that, really. And of course, I have to twist them around to see if they look like an animal or a mask or whatever it is. And, I mean, I'd see the customers looking at me, but I've also had a security guard looking at me once. I put it down and I thought, well, I think I'll get out of this shop before it gets more embarrassing. And I walked out and he followed me out, you know. So it is a bit dodgy sometimes.
1. Thunderbirds are go.
Reacting to Thunderbird's fever in 1993 triggered Blue Peter's most famous make, Tracy Island.
We knew it was going to be a very good make because, of course, everybody was so interested in Thunderbirds. But I don't think we realised how big it was going to be. It was a talking point of the nation for a few weeks.
What's your eardrum?
Lovely. I haven't made a Tracy Island for at least 5 weeks.
700 makes later, Margaret's still coming up with uses for old detergent bottles. But live battles with sticky-backed plastic are not all the presenters have to contend with.
I put the car into first gear and began the run-up. There was no turning back now.
I did the thing, and I've got to say I was scared, no question about it. I'm immensely proud that I didn't chicken out of it, but I think it was total stupidity not to do.
lined up with the ramp, and here I go.
That was a very scary moment. I reached nowhere near the cars that were supposed to cushion the blow.
The second before you hit the ramp, you want to go straight back. You don't want to do it.
And actually, at that point, you think, I'm going to die now. And then you're through and it's done and you didn't die and you weren't even scratched. So what am I moaning about? But I think that was absolute stupidity. Danger running? Ha! Never heard of it. Not a penny.
I had fear twice. Once was a kid's swing, would you believe?
Oh, dear! This is terrifying! Oh, I got my feet in the water! It's the tree!
But the worst one was these 3 giant sway poles. I think they originally went up to about 80 feet, but on these they just had 60 feet.
You got to come down the same side you went up.
Fear is probably the most terrifying emotion you can actually have. You freeze up, you can't think straight, your muscles don't work. And at the bottom, there was a great concrete block it was in, and it was full of dirty water.
I was terrified. I really was. My mouth is so dry. I can hardly talk. Hang on, there's a bit of water here.
And I had to just swill my mouth out in order to talk. That is fear. And I would never like to go through it again.
It was great, and I was loving every second of it until I heard a terrific crash. When the spray had settled, all I could see was a shattered hull, the remains of Val's boat.
Later, I was told that when the engine had torn off, it had flipped back and had torn the back of the seat that I was sitting in to shreds and was within about, that much of actually tearing my back to pieces.
I was hurtling earthwards at 120 miles per hour, and it was fantastic. I'm a great coward. I also don't like heights. It was quite amusing to me to see myself as this person going, how high is it? I'll go up there, where's my helmet? Because not in real life at all.
But the real Janet Ellis came down to earth with a bump. She broke her leg while training to break a record and wanted to give up.
Biddy said, darling, we'd really like you to carry on with the parachuting. How do you feel about that? So I explained that I was a little reluctant, and she said, darling, I want you to think of your courage like a ketchup bottle. And if there's only a tiny bit of courage just in the bottom of the bottle, turn it upside down and shake it on the bottom, and I'm sure some more will come out. Well, it did, I suppose.
Just enough to jump into the record books and become the first civilian woman in Europe to free fall from 20,000 feet.
We jumped nearly 4 miles above the ground.
I always felt, as girls, I wanted to do everything, and I didn't see why girls shouldn't do everything. And we certainly had role reversal on Blue Peter years and years and years before it became common, right across the board in programmes.
Imagine the postman delivering this tomorrow.
Oh, so you have to be careful.
Another good thing about this soup as well is you don't have to put it through the blender.
Soufflette, which is what's it called.
Probably the most extreme example of role reversal was when viewers gained a TV brother.
I thought it would be an absolute switch-off for macho 7- and 8-year-old boys if they switched on to Blue Peter and there was Valerie Singleton holding a baby. So the idea was that John and Peter would look after Daniel.
Yeah, fat hairy thing. That was ours. Daniel, send them away.
But pioneering ideas didn't prevent criticisms that Blue Peter was old-fashioned, white and middle-class, unlike its ITV rival.
Magpie was a show I used to watch when I was a kid. I didn't really think Blue Peter said anything for me. As a child growing up in Leeds, a working-class kid, it always seemed a little bit too middle-class. the presenters seemed very well behaved. And they always seemed to say things like, now go upstairs into the loft, root around and find some crepe paper or find some really old clothes. Well, we didn't have a loft. You know, I lived in a council house in Allerton Bywater near Castleford.
In actual fact, there aren't enough middle-class children around to make up the viewing figures we have, so we know that's nonsense. And that has been proved over and over and over again by the letters, by the contact we've had from viewers.
Well, we've got some of the seeds here that people very kindly sent us after the garden had been vandalised.
Middle class or not, Blue Peter wasn't above cashing in on other programmes' bright ideas, like the garden.
I nicked it from Magpie. It was, we always monitored the opposition, and one of our great strengths is that we saw things through. You know, if we decided we were going to do something, we did it. Whereas Magpie, they did it for a bit and then they got bored with it.
The correspondence unit has always played a crucial role in Blue Peter. A record is kept of every badge-worthy letter to avoid sending out identical replies if a child writes more than once. Biddy began the system to avoid the disappointment she'd felt as a child when writing for a second time to her heroine, Enid Blyton.
I remember going to my mother in tears because it was an absolutely identical letter to the first one. It was simply awful.
To this day, whenever a viewer writes to the programme, they receive a personal reply.
It is a true interactive programme with the target audience, i.e. children. Interactive before its time, before that word was even being used.
We've got some news about your letters, because we've got a rather unusual programme today in that nearly every single item is hinged on your ideas that you sent us and on your questions and suggestions in your letters.
We reckon that about 70% of the ideas in each programme came directly or indirectly from viewers' letters.
My mum says, Karen, do something with your hair and what you wear.
When Karen Keating's desire to follow the 80s fashion trends brought in large numbers of letters, the programme turned the complaints to its advantage.
They had a huge competition to design an outfit for me, and they got something like 97,000 entries for it. And I chose, I think, the most inventive one that I could find.
Most people who've watched Blue Peter at any point in their lives have not only sat and watched it, they've been involved in it. They've either contributed to an appeal, they have made something they've seen on Blue Peter, they have visited a place that they've seen on Blue Peter. The key to the success of Blue Peter is the involvement that everybody has in the programme.
We're calling it our rags appeal because that's what we want, rags. Or to be more precise, old wool and cotton.
We want you to collect them, send them to us, and we, for every can you send us, will turn into money.
The philosophy of the Blue Peter appeals has always been to enable every viewer to take part, not just to raise the maximum amount of money. Years before television appealery became commonplace, Blue Peter had been raising millions of pounds for causes in Britain and all over the world.
It had to be something where children could and can still make a difference and have some sense of empowerment.
The 1979 appeal reacted to the devastation in Cambodia caused by the Pol Pot regime.
It was quite a coup for the programme because I think we were the first people to get in since John Pilger had filmed there, and it was quite a struggle to get in there. And it obviously touched the hearts of the nation because we had a phenomenal response.
An extraordinary £3 million was raised for Cambodia. It brought food, equipment and lorries. 9 years later, Blue Peter returned when more help was needed.
You could just see what an enormous change a programme like that could make. We got stuck in mud, you know, miles outside where we were going to, and people came out to dig the Land Rover out, and they had hose, which I'd got 10 years ago with the Blue Peter sticker still on it. I've been in, like, Oxfam shops or whatever where I've seen kids coming in tears, but giving away their favourite toy because they didn't really understand the concept of what was going on, but what they grasped was that by giving their favourite fire engine or whatever else, they could maybe help another little girl or boy.
You have done it. You have made £1 million.
Yeah, isn't it great news? Now, your bring and buy sales have raised this enormous amount of money for the people of Camperchire. Well done.
Blue Peter thrives on tradition. Its cyclical nature is not only demonstrated by the appeals, but by the favourite items which return for each new generation of viewers.
Are you not coming in, Leslie?
No, I'm not. You know, there's a rule which says that ladies can't swim in the Serpentine in the winter.
This was the moment of truth. It was even colder than I'd expected. You obviously have to be very hardy to be a member of the Serpentine Swimming Club and do this every week throughout the winter.
Biddy decided that we should do this film, which had been done before, I think, with John Noakes. And you'd like to do it, wouldn't you, Mark? I said, I can think of nothing worse on New Year's Day than, oh, it'll be fine, it'll be great, you know. And when it came to doing it, I just couldn't jump in. Karen jumped in. And I put my foot in, and it was like instant frostbite on my foot, and I thought, what is that going to do to other parts? And finally, I jump in, and I just couldn't breathe. I'm going,
Oh, no! Oh!
And, of course, when the film went back and Biddy saw it, she said, you stupid boy. She said, what's the matter with you? She said, John Noakes went up and down 3 or 4 times. I said, well, John would, wouldn't he? That's typical. I said, but at least it's different, Biddy.
A new challenge for the men began in 1981 with the first London Marathon.
It's probably the first time I'd been out of the studio and to see what the power of television, how it works, and to run 26 miles through the streets of London and see that number of people cheering just for you. It felt like it was the, you know, my marathon. And that was really kind of special.
Outside of the studio and leaving Television Centre, you did want to take it all off, you know, take off the guise of the Blue Peter presenter. And there are things that happen to you in life where you are forced to do that. You come out of Television Centre and nearly got run over by someone who's not looking as you cross over the zebra crossing, and you scream abuse at someone. I mean, it's a pretty good feeling anyway, isn't it? But when they look at you and they think, oh my God, that was Sarah Green, Blue Peter presenter, just telling me to off. And it has a double impact. But what one would have to be careful about very quickly is making sure there isn't a 5-year-old child standing with an earshot, because you're kind of letting them down.
My granny always used to say that you should always warm a pot first.
Yes.
All the children, the minute they saw a presenter, and it was like an old friend. I mean, they'd almost start a conversation in the middle because they knew them. In spite of that one-way medium, those presenters were their friends.
She also said, you know, whatever's going on in those children's lives, whether their parents are, you know, fighting or getting divorced or they're having a terrible time at school or whatever else, I want you 3 presenters there in their living rooms, and at that time it was twice a week. I want you to be there because you're going to be a really stable influence in their lives.
For your future.
That stability was shaken periodically when a presenter decided to move on.
I really left it too late, I think. I reckon I should have left after about 7 years, but I stayed 10 and a half. And it wasn't, I've got to get away from this. It really was, I think I've stayed here too long. I've got to start doing something else. I can't carry on doing a kids' programme for the rest of my life. And by that time, I was 40.
What's in here?
Hey, to remind you.
It's to remind me.
Of us.
Good heavens. Oh, no. Waking up.
Towards the end of Blue Peter, when I was so tired and knackered, didn't know where I was coming or going sometimes, people say, hey, you got a good job, John. Hey, I wish I had your job. And I said, you can have the blooming job. You can have it.
Percy Thrower.
Do you remember you gave me a surprise early in the year? There we are.
Biddy couldn't, at first, deal with the fact that I could possibly want to present on any other programme than Blue Peter. What more could somebody want? And then when it transpired, not only was I going to go on and present, but also on another children's programme, that must have taken some getting over.
Oh, dear. Look at this pink. Matches me hair.
Blue Peter had shown that it could survive the loss of a presenter. But the real test came in 1988 when Biddy herself decided to call it a day.
Biddy, we've got some flowers for you here.
Her deputy, Lewis Bronze, took over.
Look, you're getting
There you are.
and everything.
You're
They're
so
beautiful.
kind.
So I think it's a bit like, could we imagine life without Mrs. Thatcher? Well, surprisingly, we could once it happened. And I think we were all very nervous about, you know, what would happen when Biddy left.
As a viewer watching it before I joined the programme, I would have said that it was just on the verge of becoming a bit twee. and during my era there with Lewis, it had more of an edge to it.
Now, notice actually where you're standing as well, there are huge cracks in the edge of the cliff here. How long's that been like that?
That's been like that a couple of weeks.
I wanted to bring a slightly more topical, newsy, I mean, it's not a news programme, but I wanted to bring a slightly more topical edge to the programme.
Nelson Mandela has claimed victory in South Africa's election. He tells his jubilant people they can now reclaim their country.
Joy that we can loudly proclaim from the rooftops, free at last.
Apartheid meant that Tim and I wouldn't be able to walk down the street like this together.
In fact, I would never have set foot in a black township like Soweto.
We would have been forced to use separate buses, separate park benches, separate schools.
And Diane wouldn't have been able to visit me in a white town without permission.
I just think for a children's programme, to do a summer trip, you know, without being heavy about it, just literally presenting the facts as they are, to bring an issue up like that in a way that children can understand is one of the strengths of Blue Peter. In a couple of weeks' time, there won't just be 2 Blue Peters a week, but 3. And you can see from our flashing clock which days they're going to be.
The most significant change for Lewis came in 1995. It was a risk that paid off.
It worked. 3 times a week worked. The audience figures were fantastic the first 6 months or so after we did it, which is one of the reasons I left, because I thought, it ain't going to get this good again. Go while you're ahead.
During his 8 years as editor, he's been affectionately known as Funky Lou.
Lewis Bronze is also credited for bringing in a more relaxed and informal approach, both behind and in front of the camera.
Is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, I'm going to miss you, Tim, and all the presenters and all the production team.
30 seconds on chat.
And 30 seconds on chat.
You got 30 seconds,
Well, it's a great programme to work on, Tim, as everyone knows.
Oh, great. I love standing on telly with a pom-pom.
It was left to his successor, Oliver McFarlane, who'd also worked under Biddy Baxter, to face the challenge of cable and satellite channels dedicated to children.
Can't the other 3 just be a little bit closer so that, you know, they're all standing in a line, aren't they?
Digital television. The most important development for British TV since the introduction of colour.
The digital channels will bring yet more competition.
We will need to adapt and change somewhat, but we're not going to rush headlong with the pack. Blue Peter is multimedia itself. We have a website, we have our own CD-ROM. Of course the programme can't dominate the schedule in a multi-channel world, but we can remain distinctive, we can remain different, and we can still be a major voice for children in broadcasting.
The days of one programme dominating the landscape are gone forever. They'll never come back. Blue Peter could not become today, starting from scratch. No programme will ever become today what Blue Peter was in the 60s and 70s. It's just inconceivable.
I think as long as BBC One exists, Blue Peter will exist. It may change its transmission times, it may change its shape, it may change its presenters, but there will always be Blue Peter. It will always provide that public service, informational, entertaining cornerstone to BBC children's programmes.
From a celebration of Blue Peter, we head towards a celebration in the world of snooker. Who will face Ronnie in the final? It's the second of today's semis from York as the UK Championship continues next on BBC Two.